Heyo, and welcome back to another video. In this one, what I wanted to talk about today was my recently released video. Now, I decided to take some time to respond to some comments because it just seems like there's either a misconception of what I wanted from a Persona 3 re-release, or that, like, I wanted this now, or just quite a few things that I think I need to try to address, even though I think I've made it kind of clear in my initial video. The consensus of the comments basically says, this doesn't need to happen. You shouldn't want this 2 years after the game's release. The issue being is I never said that I wanted this now. I never disclose that. Now, where I thought I got misinterpreted is when I said imperative. Imperative means importance of some type, right? And sometimes it means urgently or right now. And so I can kind of understand where people are coming from, where they may have thought I wanted this right now, only after 2 years of the game's release. However, with that said, Atlus has released games within 3 years of the release, which is Persona 5 to Persona 5 Royal, 2016 to 2019 with the JP releases. But the reason I think genuinely it is important for Atlus to do this at some point, a re-release of Persona 3 Reload, because the game is genuinely in that awkward spot, because now you have the upcoming Persona 4 Revival that has all the content within the game, right? And then any other remake that would come after that is going to make Persona 3 Reload look weird because it doesn't have all the content within the game. Because, you know, if Persona 2 doesn't have the second game, Eternal Punishment, within it, like, people are going to be furious. That's just one example. But even prior re-releases that Atlus has made, like Persona 5 to Persona 5 Royal, so in that respect, a re-release for Persona 3 would actually make sense. Does it have to happen now? No. Using imperative is probably the bad word for it. But I think now you can kind of see what I'm trying to say here. Because while I think this is important at some point to do, I didn't think it needed to happen right now while they're still working on Persona 4 Revival, or potentially a new project, if it's remake related, especially if it's Persona 1 and 2. But if there is some dead time, which I did say this in the video, but I didn't actually include it in the video because I went on a huge rant where I didn't think it came out right, and I accidentally deleted the entire thing. Then, because I went on such a ramble, and I didn't end up re-recording it. But if there's dead time between Persona 1 and 2 / Persona 6 coming out, where Atlus isn't releasing a big major release, I think in that time span, that'd probably be the best way to release it. Now, once again, I legitimately thought that was in the video, but it looks like it wasn't, because I ended up rewatching it, and maybe it was like a last minute cut where I didn't remember doing it. Again, I was recovering from a pretty severe tooth infection, so I probably shouldn't upload again once I just recovered from like something like that, because it really did screw with kind of my mind, and I was like laying down for basically a week, and overall, I was just happy to come back to make content at the end of the day. It wasn't necessarily like there was some malice intent to cause some sort of discourse, like a comment I'll get into later kind of implied or assumed that, which is still kind of disrespectful just based on the content that I've made in the past, and I've never kind of dabbled into this sort of controversial territory, but it is something that, like, I do understand where some of my words may have come off strong and maybe bold even, especially the remaster term, where, you know, remaster is also kind of a strong term in the same context that people are sick of re-releases and remasters. Remasters is like if you have a game that released, let's say, 3 years ago, like most of Sony's games, and oh, we need to make a remaster of it because it looks ugly with PS4 graphics, and we're porting it to PS5, but you still have to pay $60 instead of an upgrade fee, unlike how it used to be, where it used to be only $10. So I get that, with the terminology that I ended up using, was kind of awful. And I just didn't know how else to describe what I was describing, because Atlus ends up doing re-releases with their games, and at the end of the day, I still believe that they're technically in some form of a remaster, because it's still a re-release. But more or less, I meant it in the sense of a golden and royal edition type of re-release, not so much a literal definition term of a remaster, if you will. Which I did mention that in the video, but I think it may have gotten a bit missed. While people were pretty adamant in saying that this can't happen, a definitive edition shouldn't happen, one of my points was Persona 5 X is randomly adding FEMC to the game, and overall, it was just another thing that happened along with seeing the Persona 4 Revival trailer. So the idea essentially just came into my mind where, you know, a definitive edition probably wouldn't be a bad idea at this point, because if they're releasing FEMC for Persona 5 X, that part of the model work is done for them for the most part. While they'll probably have to adjust FEMC for, of course, the engine, it is a decent amount of work that's already done, and then they have to kind of work on scripting the new social links, and I think modeling and voicing those new social links. So it would be quite a bit of work, but that work would be more so dedicated towards a re-release, so that Persona 3 Reload can be the best version of Persona 3 with all the content within it. And while I did harp on the fact that Persona 4 Revival looks so much better than Persona 3 Reload, it was also just the point that it had all the content within the game, because they already showed Marie, so Golden's not going to be some weird separate expansion like some people are somewhat worried about, because if they didn't listen to that criticism with Persona 3 Reload, it would have been pretty messy with Persona 4 Revival if they would have even tried to charge a DLC price for that content. Even though I did kind of harp on the fact that, yeah, Persona 4 Revival does look quite a bit better than Persona 3 Reload, but even with some of the quirks I had with the game, some people were commenting on it, but some people assumed that I said the game looked like crap, which I primarily said the dorm lighting. It's like, it just seems like a lot of the things I did say got lost in interpretation, I guess, in some regards, because of how I stated that Persona 3 Reload could use a re-release. Regardless to say, I did actually want to get into a few comments in regards to this video. The first being someone who basically was memeing at first that Persona 5 Royal needs a remake, and I'm like, yes, needs to be UE6, just joking. And I just go into detail that, like, honestly, it lifted up Persona 5 Classic quite a bit. Then they respond with, no, P5 Royal besides resolution is the same game graphically. Mostly, yes, it added some new graphics elements, but P5 and P5R looks very same-ish in graphics, which I do agree about. But then he goes on to say, but then again, you think Persona 3 Reload looks bad. Which, no, I didn't say that. I said specifically two things that look kind of janky with the game, which is the dorm and the in-engine cutscenes that are pre-rendered. I don't think I ever said all of the environments were ass and Fez is the best game ever, while even though they did the dorm right, I think that Reload adds a whole new life into these environments that Persona 3 Fez couldn't, because it was limited to the PS2. But then with the follow-up response, I got a bit snarky, because while I believe that there is a significant difference between Persona 5 and Persona 5 Royal, while same-ish graphics, I think Persona 5 Royal looks significantly better than the original Persona 5, especially if you went back and forth between the two versions. And I basically try to claim that maybe he just experienced the game through a YouTube video, which, yeah, kind of mean on my part, but they were kind of getting mean to me and kind of discounting what I said initially, that I agreed that Persona 5 Royal looked good enough and looked great. And then he goes on to say that I did, and a lot of this video comes down to, oh no, the sequel of this game looks better, please remake please, whichever game that's ever come out. Which then I pretty much go on a tangent. While I get a bit confused as to why this community got kind of on my ass for calling it a remaster, because it is essentially a remaster for both of these games. Well, we could get in the technicality that it's technically a re-release and a definitive edition. At the end of the day, it's still a new version of the game, while mostly the same, adding new content and adding new graphics elements, whether it's for a new console or not. It's still kind of the same concept as a remaster. Which then they try to say that Persona 3 Reload isn't a re-release, which it is. It actually is a re-release. A remake can be a re-release of a game, regardless of what it is. Some stay on the narrow path, staying on track, while others will go on a different path, which then he did try to claim, like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is also a re-release of the original game split into 3 games. Which, yes, Final Fantasy VII Remake is essentially a foundation from the original work in 1997 to make this remake. While it does stuff differently for sure and makes it into a new experience, that's just another example of a re-release that's also a remake, but obviously very different than a traditional on the tracks remake. So at the end of the day, while Persona 3 Reload is a remake, it still is another Atlus re-release, which is based off of Persona 3 Fez, some of the movie details, and it's not really portable as most of that content's not there, besides the Mel Hangouts, which is pretty much kind of what that's based off of, to make everyone happy that they get additional story elements added to them. So this comment, like, I just didn't think they watched the video necessarily, but they got pretty rude to me, and then I got kind of rude back. So 2 wrongs don't make a right, but I did try to explain my points, in a sense, but it just didn't seem like it exactly got through. But the main reasoning as to why Persona 3 Reload kinda, I feel, didn't get the best treatment, even though it was in kind of development hell with the pandemic and all of that going on while this thing was in production, is the fact that they were cutting content with also being limited to a budget. It just kind of like seeing how Persona 4 Revival is having all the content in one game rather than splitting it up in the DLC. It still boggles my mind that they didn't think that fans would want Episode Aigis, even though it wasn't really well received. Sadly, still not the best story. And while it did release, because of the backlash that this wasn't going to be initially included with Reload, but was a DLC skin, a music pack, and then the DLC later in that year, which still is fine. Like, I'm happy that it still came out in some form of way. It's still the issue that with other re-releases with Atlus, that we didn't necessarily get a definitive way to play Persona 3 still because of the portable content being cut, even looking towards, let's just say, Persona 5 to Persona 5 Royal or Persona 4 to Persona 4 Golden. It's just the point that, like, even with that standard in mind of Atlus re-releases, on top of Persona 4 Revival, it just puts this game in a weird predicament and doesn't have the same quality as those re-releases. So that's why my idea was a definitive edition at some point would actually make quite a decent amount of sense for this game, to make it the definitive way to play the game. And then we got John Persona here. I don't really have beef with the guy, I don't really dislike them because they didn't necessarily agree with the video or the way I went about it, but I did want to comment on it because I do want to give my kind of 2 cents here, where I don't know how to necessarily feel about his comments at this point after rewatching my video, for instance. So let's just get right into this comment. We have genuinely lost the plot here. Give it 2 to 3 years or so, next gen definitive edition upgrade is the closest you're possibly gonna get. So from that comment, you know, it didn't seem like they watched the video and kind of dismissed anything and everything that I said in the video. So it perplexed me to kind of clarify my stance and to kind of summarize the video because I was quite honestly confused as to what they meant by that. And then they basically go on to say, P3R was developed in-house with a bunch of new staff working with a brand new game engine in the middle of the COVID pandemic. P4R being outsourced and built by experienced staff is using Reload's design philosophy and assets as a strong basis. I don't know why people are surprised that Reload had a lot of hiccups with the development time and constraints and budget when you look at the circumstances. Also, Episode Aegis was quite rushed as well. It was developed shortly after Reload's massive launch and hardly fit in their development schedule. I understand that Revival looks better, but think it's pretty clear why it's the case. A lot of people boil it down to New Game looks better when there's a lot more behind the scenes with the development of both games. I also need to preface that Reload is a really good remake, even if it had a rocky development cycle. It's a miracle it turned out as well as it did, because it should have been way worse. It is absolutely the definitive version of Persona 3, and the first one I recommend despite the fact that it's missing content. I'm far from opposed to a definitive version of Reload. I've advocated for one myself. This just is not something that we need right now, and not something that would be wise for a business standpoint of view. I don't know what you intended, but from my perspective, it feels like you made this video to sponsor discourse instead of discussion, mainly because of the title and thumbnail. But because your responses come up as quite abrasive, I'm not here to debate, because I agree with a lot of the points you were talking about. But the way you went about making this video is not it, and left a bad taste in my mouth after finishing it. So this comment is kind of a big one to take in. So they were pretty insightful in the sense of going through and talking about how Persona 3 Reload was essentially developed. It is great insight into it, but part of me likes to reason, of course, with the budgeting issues that they had with the game is why it ended up getting so limited, along with developing it through the pandemic. The issue is that I still have is that Sega/Atlus isn't a small company, right? So it is kind of aggravating in the sense that they didn't give the director more of a budget to work with, or senior staff to oversee the project, maybe trying to like keep some of the original intent with the game, like the Fez cutscenes, for instance. Like, I still think they're a bit more better than some of the scenes that we got in Reload. But Reload does shine in other ways that Fez couldn't because it was limited to the PS2. Although with what we got, I am happy with it. It still could have been better if Atlus/Sega had more confidence in the project. Obviously, it sold really well. Listening to the criticism from Persona 3 Reload to Persona 4 Revival obviously made Persona 4 Revival a lot more of a better experience, and especially including the golden content within the game so that it's not separated. But in terms of quality control after the game released, I don't think I can really defend that, even if they rushed Episode Aegis out the door because it barely fit into their dev time, because they ended up making the Switch 2 version. So I guess the weird part about this is they could have fixed the dorm lighting as they were working on the Switch 2 version, because apparently it's a UE4 bug that they just never ended up fixing. And they didn't. They instead ended up releasing the older OSTs on all platforms, which I believe was the only thing that ended up happening last with the game. Which is kind of funny, but at the same time, obviously they wanted to get to work on Persona 3 Revival. Whether or not it's heavily outsourced, or they are also having the same staff work on this remake too, or alongside this remake they're working on Persona 1 remake, or both Persona 1 and 2 remake. So then with the second part of this comment, it kind of bothers me in a really bad way, because your initial comment doesn't even come across like you watched the video. So then I try to re-explain my points that I made in the video, but then it comes across as abrasive to you because you essentially are assuming that I know that you watched the video, when clearly it just looks like you commented something just responding to the title and the thumbnail, and then not really hearing me out too much. But then this shows that you, while agree with me, which I didn't know before, and while I didn't know if you disagreed with me before, I didn't even know if you watched the video before. You just didn't agree with the way that I went about making the video, which again, I think that I can do better in the sense of presenting information. But what doesn't come across right to me is the assumption that, or how you felt, rather than asking the question initially, or approaching it so I could have actually directly confront that. You instead kind of enacted on your feelings than knowing my intention of the video, because then you assume that there is malicious intent with the video, which you assume that it sponsors discourse when I even tried to bring up at the beginning of the video that I don't hate Reload and that I don't think it's in any way, shape, or form a Solus remake like I've heard before. So it is kind of like a frustrating comment to even take in. Whether or not you are here to debate wasn't the point of why I responded the way I did to your initial comment. So it just comes across to me like, it just essentially comes across to me rather than like approaching it initially like, hey, like while I agree with this, I don't necessarily agree with the way you went about this video for me to be able to confront that. Instead, I didn't even really get a chance to comment on my intent of the video. And generally, if you look at any of my other thumbnails and titles, I thought it lined up with some of those that I've made in the past. So I'm pretty perplexed with this comment, but your initial comment even just comes across as somewhat disrespectful when you pretty much just say we've lost the plot here, dismissing literally anything I said in the video as well. So at this rate and at this point, I don't think engaging in this part of the community at this point, discussing kind of how a game could improve within the future is really worth it. Like, if this is kind of the assumption that there was malice intent with the thumbnail and title, and like, I don't even think I was that harsh in the video itself either. So for it to, I guess, spawn such a reaction is questionable to begin with. It's just rather like, I was a bit bold, sure, I came off a bit strong, but at the end of the day, I wasn't shitting on Reload. Like, it seems like people are thinking I did, and that's where, like, I'm so kind of lost with this. Like, I don't know, maybe I'm reading too into his comment, but, like, at this point, like at the end of the day, it just seems like it's extremely, like, your initial comment just comes off as extremely dismissive, and even though you tried to, like, say why you may have commented that way with the second paragraph of your response, you didn't confront it initially so that I could even, like, give a response. Instead, I'm accused of being too abrasive with my response to you, and maybe some other responses, because it didn't seem like some people watched the video. At the end of the day, it just kind of sucks that this is kind of the reaction this individual had, and I'm not saying they had to like the video, but it's just the point that it could have been said better, if you will. And while my video could have been said better as well, but it just doesn't help. Now, someone like Lenny GBA, for instance, was really happy that I brought up the codec issue with the cutscenes within Persona 3 Reload, but specifically the end-engine pre-rendered ones. And they really, while I know a certain degree about codecs and all that, I am still kind of like a novice when it comes to that, but I still upload in H.264 with 2pass VBR, because if I try to use H.265, it ends up getting compressed. But it's just a point, like, I made this video in the sense of actually trying to find critiques of the game in which they could improve with a definitive version at some point in the future, and this person actually was discussing that with me and actually elaborating why, you know, it's so weird that they do this in different Atlus games. But there's pretty much quite a few comments that basically were like kind of just not discussing the contents of the video, that they were more or less just going off of, oh, we just don't need this right now, and that's fine. That wasn't really the point of the video. And nor was the point to add discourse, but just a general discussion on, like, how this can happen and why it would be a good idea for Atlus to do this sometime in the future, whether it's the near future or within 4 to 5 years of its release. Well, there were some people that were pretty supportive of the video. There were quite a few meme ones, I would kind of argue, like this one. Persona fans, when they get cucked out of their relationship, remaster please. That I'm basically like, is bro good? Who hurt you? And they just respond to Atlas. We've all been hurt by Atlas before, right, guys? And then someone in my comment brought it to my attention that I got roasted while also saying that they do want Atlas to do re-releases still, which kind of the consensus from that original post, it does look like people would be pretty adamant if they added FEMC in some way, even if it is through an update or a re-release. So it is kind of like a 50-50 shot where it just looks like some people want this for specifically FEMC and to improve kind of the underlying issues that are still present in the game, but it could be easily fixed with a patch, which I'm still kind of wondering why they didn't take the time to fix those, but I guess they were kind of rushing through just finishing episode, I guess. But then they later added the Switch 2 version with the older OSTs on all platforms. So it is kind of funny that while they did put more work into it, they didn't like put more work into actually quality controlling it in some regard. While some people could argue the older OSTs are quality control for it, which I have seen discourse with the vocals within the game, which I personally still don't have a problem with the new vocalist, but at the end of the day, that's kind of where we're at right now. And then there is someone like Shiny Guy who ended up saying, I haven't finished the game yet, so I'll get back to this video when I do. However, with what I experienced, I don't believe it needs a remaster. Now, then I kind of clarified, right, as that I'm not saying it definitely needs it, as it is a solid game still, but it would be welcomed in terms of working out some of the cutscene kinks and adding FEMC. Even if it's an anniversary update to Reload, as it would be super cool still, as it would continue giving the game some support even years after release, which is not impossible to think anymore, as a game like The Witcher 3 randomly got an update 12 years later, or DLC 12 years later after its release. And they said an update would make much more sense. And honestly, I just didn't primarily know how to go about saying what I was thinking initially in the video because of the fact that Atlas makes re-releases all the time, so it was hard for me to really come up with anything at the time other than remaster, because that's what I was thinking in my head. I should have said definitive edition, because that's what Royal is, for instance, Golden, and whatever other, or in SMT5 Vengeance, and whatever other re-releases Atlas does have. And I'll admit someone did bring up a good point, which is Agent Blister. Guys, get ready for Persona 3 Reload Royal in 5 years, where it adds FEMC and costs us $80 to $90 friggin', but at least we still have the answer included. It is kind of what Atlas does sometimes, where they put content within the game on a re-release and then charge full price, but sometimes keep it heavily discounted to make it seem like you're getting a sale when you're getting charged basically for a $30 kind of upgrade, if you will. That's what happened with Persona 5 Royal on PS5, which is why initially I critiqued the hell out of Persona 5 releasing a PS5 version without being able to do save transfers or an upgrade path for like $10 for just simply an FPS cap upgrade. And that's literally, you cannot tell me otherwise, that's basically what it is. Because even then I think I got some flack for it because they kept it heavily discounted. So people aren't understanding my frustration coming from the PS4. Along with Andy, I think I'm gonna probably say the last part of your name. They also bring up the point that Atlas needs to do a lot more remasters than remastering Persona, but my main thing was I don't think remake team or the separate team that is working on the remakes for Persona, while I think Persona 4 Revival is heavily outsourced, it still has to have, you know, a level of a team that is kind of overseeing the project and trying to help with development with, you know, internal assets from Atlas. So while that might not be 100% accurate, that's kind of just what I personally believe, and I don't think that's far-fetched to say. Regardless to say, I personally believe that Atlas needs more of a remastering team than just having it for the Persona team. Atlas has a big category of games that could use re-releases on the modern platforms, especially Steam, as with how things are going, that might be the future we kind of live in, where and the Switch, obviously, where the Switch and Steam are probably the only ones left with how these consoles are going at this rate. So I personally still think they should all release on all platforms, of course. I just think that Atlas does need more of a dedicated team to doing remasters than it kind of releasing one here and there when there's not really a big release coming out for the studio. Then I got another kind of comment that didn't really understand the video, but again, maybe I wasn't really expanding my thoughts properly. From Happy Dude, every game doesn't need to be as high quality as the last, bro. If that was the case, Persona 5 Royal should have been upgraded to the graphic standards as Persona 3 Reload when it came out, but it doesn't need to because they are amazing and high quality games. The issue is I never stated that necessarily graphically Persona 3 Reload was kind of bad in that sense. I just said the oh my god, I almost said CGI. I'm showing my age. I just said the pre-rendered cutscenes looked bad and they could adjust that with a new release. I think people are misconstruing that, and along with the dorm graphics, because they do look relatively dated. I didn't say that Persona 3 Reload as a whole looks like shit, because I still think Persona 3 Reload has some of the most beautiful environments in the sense of bringing Persona 3 Fez to a new engine and just all these environments really just looking amazing. Obviously, there are some critiques like I mentioned in the video, which I don't really need to go into further detail because I already talked about it, but I once again think people just think I said something completely different. It kind of stinks because, like, I actually want to discuss things that, you know, I actually did mention, which I didn't say the game was graphically crap. So it's just hard for me to keep trying to engage with people that didn't quite watch the video or understand what I said, I guess. So then there was another comment from Silena that said, I felt a loss in quality going from Persona 5 Royal to Persona 3 Reload, so I feel like it should have delivered more from the start, which I do actually agree with Silena here, and is kind of the premise of my point that Persona 3 Reload inherently is a re-release of Persona 3, so you would theoretically think they would try to include most, if not all, of the content within Persona 3 Fez and Portable. Well, once again, they did end up doing mostly Fez content and some elements of Portable, but sadly, there is still a pretty big fan base for FMC, so it's still just the issue that that big portion is cut from the game still. They also mentioned some of the jank they ended up experiencing because they used keyboard and mouse to play, so they had to actually use a mod to fix it, but then it still feels weird in comparison to Persona 5 Royal using mouse and keyboard, so there is that level of jank that was never fixed, and they had to essentially use a mod to play the game, which isn't like a bad thing. I mean, the option is there and available, especially for PC players, to improve the game or turn off motion blur like I did through the scripting of the game, which really stinks that was not an in-game option for the console versions of the game. But once again, this could be solved with some type of patch or a re-release in the future. And while the comments between Happy and Silena continue through this, like, kind of just like different kind of things, like models being better than one game than the other, and so on and so forth. While I think obviously there is definitely a difference of opinion here, I don't think one side is more right than the other one. Well, I can just mainly see Silena's point that they felt that there was a loss in quality going from Royal to this, which is primarily the point I was also trying to make, is the fact that Persona 5 Royal is pretty good and really doesn't need any type of re-releasing going forward, especially with future remakes to come out. It just puts Persona 3 Reload in an awkward spot, especially if all these remakes keep all the content within the games. So if you don't include Persona 2 Internal Punishment, then there's a big issue where a big portion of that game is still kind of lost to time, if you will. At least for the portable version of the game, from what I understand, Persona has had some issues in the past with westernizations back in the day. Persona 1 being the most infamous example of that, along with, I don't know if it's as bad as it is in Persona 2, but I do know the PS1 version of the game released in the West, just not the PSP version, which I don't know how accurate the translation is, or if the PSP version added a few different features. It's still the point that the PSP version, for instance, just isn't available in the US as in a official capacity in a sense. It's just food for thought, just thinking about it in that perspective too. It's not so much that this game is bad, it's just things in the future for this game can be better, and that is kind of the point I was just trying to make with the initial video. But clearly I think I may have just not expanded my point right in the video. So with that said, I hope you enjoyed this video. Hopefully it puts some of the kind of issues that you may have had with the original to rest a bit, and now you kind of understand my intention for Persona 3 Reload Definitive Edition. Not that it was supposed to sponsor any type of discourse, which I think people in the sense are afraid to talk about Persona 3 Reload because it then entertains discourse, but then how do you talk about something without entertaining the discourse? It's kind of the same situation with, I guess, like Final Fantasy VII Remake discourse, where some people love it, some people hate it, the extra details, for instance, that added, while other people love the crap out of it. I'm kind of in the camp where I really love Final Fantasy VII, and so just getting more out of Final Fantasy VII is always welcomed, in my opinion. There is some jank, of course, with Final Fantasy VII, but that's not the discussion for today. It's just the point that some people just didn't really understand what I was getting at, or some people misconstrued what I was talking about. So hopefully, I really do actually hope this video clarified a lot of what I was trying to say in the original video, while also responding to certain comments that I now just don't really agree with, and I probably will be going forward definitely trying to expand my thoughts, maybe in longer form content. In the sense where if the video has to be 15 minutes long, then 10 minutes, then maybe that's what I'm gonna have to do at this point. I'll try not to do that, but it's like, people really took it the complete opposite direction of what I was even saying, and especially in regards to this remake needs to happen now, which is not what I said. In a couple of years, I think that this would be a fine thing to do, or if there is some dead time between Persona releases. So with that said, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.